Mobile hunters, if you're looking to up your mobile game, head to tetherednation.com and check out all of their saddle gear. Regardless if you're new to saddle hunting or an old tree climbing veteran, Tethered will have your mobile hunting needs covered. I've been using and trusting Tethered gear since they launched and have used it in all types of hunting situations, from the mountains of Pennsylvania to the plains of Kansas. It has been the constant in my hunting gear and allows me to be as mobile and as versatile as the hunt requires. My favorite pieces of gear currently is my Phantom saddle, the ultralight one-stick climbing sticks, the Predator platform, and the Fast Pack, which is the best hunting pack for a mobile hunter in my opinion. Also makes a great scouting and trail camera hanging pack. If you're looking for gear to help up your game and be more mobile, keeping you in the hunt, then head over to tetherednation.com.
Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 342. Today I'm joined by my buddy Steve Sherk. If you want to know how to use the 30-30 days to kill more mature bucks, stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. I am presently dragging ass as I'm recording this. Literally just got back home to my homestead. Spent the past weekend back in my hometown visiting family. It was my grandmother's 90th birthday, so lots to celebrate there. 90 years. It's kind of crazy to think, how old I am, and then the fact that she's that much older. But she looks great. She still gets around. She was happy to see everybody. Saw a ton of family I hadn't seen in a long time, talking deer, and just family, friends, and stuff like that I haven't seen in a long time. Some people, good Lord, some people it was, one guy I spent probably an hour catching up with. I probably hadn't seen him in 30 years, probably, since I was a kid. He was always around, and I always saw him when I was a kid and stuff like that, working at my grandfather's and then my aunt and uncle's feed and farm supply store. So it was awesome to catch up with him, talk hunting with a bunch of family members, swap some deer pictures, and just kind of got me that much more excited for the upcoming deer season. I was hanging out at my dad's and actually ended up seeing a huge bear walk across his yard, which was kind of cool. So I've had my fair share of bear encounters this year. I think I'm solid on that. So if we can go ahead and put a cap on on running into yogis at random times, that would be a good, especially as I get ready to go check trail cameras in the North Piece and just finishing up my odds and ends here as the summer kind of barrels along and we head toward the fall. But without further ado, we're gonna go ahead and just jump into today's show. Have a super cool show for you guys today. Have on Steve Sherk. A lot of you've probably heard of Steve. He's well known, especially in the kind of mountain buck circles, if you will. I had Steve on years ago. He and I did a couple part series just kind of talking about, really how he tackles, hunting mountain bucks at different times of the year and things of that nature is really kind of what the first, I want to say mini series he and I did together. It's probably been probably pretty close to 2 years ago. And, I always like to talk to Steve because he's just one of those guys. He spends a ton of time in the woods. And I know a lot of guests that we have on or that I have on, I kind of mention how much time they spend in the woods. And it is true for, all the guys that come on by and large. Like they spend, more time in the timber than the average Joe. But Steve, especially because, if you don't know, he runs a kind of guiding service in the public lands of a large piece of public land in Pennsylvania, and takes guys and puts them in good spots and, tries to get them on deer, during the course of the fall and stuff like that. And so part of what he's doing is he's out, he's got to be out kind of surveying the ground and, figuring out how deer are moving. And he runs a ton of trail cameras. He has mountains and years worth of kind of long-term data in the mountains that he's hunting in. And plus he's just been doing this for years. I mean, he grew up in this area and he spent his life in these woods, and he's got kind of a career set up to where, like the guiding thing is part of his career. And he also owns another business that he runs. And his schedule just allows for him to also kind of be out in the woods a lot. So there pretty much isn't a day that goes by that he's not in the woods. And it's always interesting to kind of get his perspective. And, especially, selfishly for me, as I'm kind of continuing to dissect this North Piece and stuff like that, bouncing things off him, and kind of running my hypotheses by him to see if some of the things that I'm seeing are things that he has seen in the past, and helps me kind of understand that maybe I'm making the right decision and it's not just, I'm seeing this thing. Maybe I saw it once and I'm wondering, is there a trend here? And I can kind of talk to him about it and say, hey, I'm seeing this. Is this a trend that you have seen? And then I don't have to necessarily wait the 3, 4, 5 years to see the trend. I can kind of take his word for, what he has seen similarly in similar kind of topography and terrain, and then kind of take that and be able to use it, and not have to wait to kind of get the data myself. I can kind of use him as a resource, and he's happy to do that. What we kind of talk about in this episode isn't necessarily how he hunts in different kind of aspects of the season and stuff like that. We've covered that in the past. But a lot of what we talk about in here is just like, if you're hunting, mountains and deer in the mountains in general, we talk a little bit, not a little bit, we talk quite a bit about, how they transition in fall and how he goes about relocating a deer that might have transitioned. How far do these deer transition that he's typically on in the summer? And really kind of talking about the stuff you guys are going to be seeing in your summer trail camera data and what it might mean as you start to get into fall. And can you make a plan around that? And if so, like, how do you do that? And if a deer kind of moves on you, like, how do you re-find him, especially in the mountains or in these big wood settings? And we talk a lot about, what Steve calls areas or places of abundance. And you'll hear us kind of talk about that. I won't kind of give that away. I'll let him kind of explain it. Talk a little about clear cuts, but maybe not in quite the way you might think. Cuts are still good, but they're becoming more and more of a very specific, if they fill a very specific type of role, I think in a lot of guys' strategy, or should fill a very specific type of role in a lot of guys' strategies, as opposed to relying on them as a large part of their strategy. Great for finding deer, maybe not so good for hunting deer just because they draw a lot of attention. And we talk a lot about that. And then the big thing that we talked about, like I said, he runs a ton of cameras. And so he does, he's done a couple podcasts where he's talked about what he's found and all this data that he's gone through. And so we don't really dive into that because he's done podcasts on that where he's gone into detail about it. We're not going to beat a dead horse here on this episode. But what I did want to know is, now that he's had time and he's talked about it a bunch, like, what are the handful of things that are really useful for a hunter to use, right? You can get into the minutia of data. I work in data every day as a career, and you can get paralyzed by it. And so what I wanted to know is, for the hunter out there, you guys, what are the 3, 4, 5 things that he has learned from all this trail camera inventory that he has that people can actually take and use in the woods? Like, what are things that are transferable and what I call in my line of work? What are those actionable insights that you can actually see, understand, and then they can help you go do something? And so we talk about that. And then the big thing, and I won't bury the lead here. I'll let him kind of explain it because he does a great job explaining it. But when we get to the part where we talk about 30-30 days, you're going to want to pay close attention because those are definitely something. When he mentioned those to me, my ears perked up and I immediately kind of, understood how to use those and the impact that those 30 days might have. And he kind of gives you some detail around that. So without further ado, words are hard for me today. I'm going to go ahead and just jump into the show. And as always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have on my good buddy, Mr. Steve Sherk. How's it going, man?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. We were just talking before we started recording that, we finally got a little bit of rain. So I ran outside and mowed my grass like a maniac, trying to get it all in because, who knows when we might get rain again and I won't be killing my grass at least.
Yep. No, it's the same way up here. And I think it was starting to even have an impact on plant life and mass crops and you name it. So I think basically the whole world or wherever, I don't know how widespread this is going on, but
right.
A lot of portions, at least of the country, was dying for some rain. So not just humans, but even in the deer hunting world and everything. So it's good to finally see it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we finally got that little bit of rain, a couple of the cell cameras I have out, it was just like all of a sudden I started seeing a bunch of action. Like it was just like someone turned the faucet on. It was like, oh, hey, we got a little rain. I'm going to get out and move around a little bit. Feel pretty good. Got a little moisture in the air, and which is nice to see. But you mentioned, so have you seen, like, I try to pay attention to it, but I'll be the first to admit that I probably don't pay close enough attention to it. Do you notice a bigger impact on the mass crop when there is a drought or we'll just say drier weather versus wetter weather? Have you noticed any kind of correlation between that and what you see in the fall dropping?
Yep, I've seen years similar to this, although this was starting out really bad, but I've never seen it to where it had an impact where we didn't have any mast at all. But what I've noticed is you'll see trees dropping like immature acorns.
Mm-hmm.
I think because they're getting stressed out. I can't, honestly say that I've ever seen it wipe, all the mast out, but you could go from likely having a real abundance of mast to, maybe more of a moderate crop or even less if the drought continues. Because like I said, those trees are going to get stressed and, they'll start dropping too early.
Yeah. Last year, I feel like was almost like the inverse of this. Like we had a ton of rain, but I feel like last year we had an early frost or a late frost, if I'm not mistaken.
Sure.
And I saw the same thing where a lot of the places that I had, earmarked as like prime time areas that had like a, good primary scrape, let's say, and there was a feed tree that was close by, like a white oak that was close by. And
Yep.
I mean, I pretty much spent, because I opened in middle of September, I pretty much spent most of September and the better part of the beginning of August. Like every hunt that I did was basically just me going to all the spots I had scouted that had feed trees and trying to find acorns, and I could not find a single acorn. I finally found one, and it was doing exactly what you were saying, which was dropping these super small, immature acorns, and that was it.
Yep. And also talking about frost, at least, for the mountain buck listeners, usually what you'll find if the majority of your oaks are down low and you have several frosts, it usually seems like the frost has more of an effect on the lower elevation oaks. That's exactly what I saw this year is you could tell, you could see the oak trees budding, and then right after the frost, a couple of days later, you see all this brown on the lower hillsides. So you could tell that the lower patches of oaks got frosted, but usually the higher elevations do okay. So if you got oak and high elevations, doesn't seem like frost usually has as much of an impact on those higher elevations.
That's interesting. Is there any, not to put you in a spot, do you have any hypothesis as to why that is? Because I would almost think the opposite would be true.
Yeah, you would think it's cold, but usually what I find this time of year, and I'm no weather expert, but it seems like the frost sets harder down low in the valleys. Like I live on the way top of a mountain, and like when we had frost, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, like there was no frost up at my house, but then everywhere down in the valleys was frosted. Now maybe there's certain times when it's the opposite, but I see that more in the spring and early summer. If we get a frost, it seems to have a greater effect down low in the valleys. I think it has something to do with maybe the cooler air staying pocketed down low until later in the morning.
Yeah.
But definitely that's what I think you're going to see in a lot of places this year is your lower oaks probably won't produce, but the higher elevation ones will.
Right. That's interesting because as you were saying it, I was just thinking, I was like, I bet that cool air settles in the bottoms, and that it needs that moisture. Where up high it doesn't settle, and it doesn't have the moisture to produce the frost.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. But how's your spring been, man? You been all good, all systems go? I know you spend like almost every waking moment in the timber.
Yeah, I will say things were a little slow for a while because with landscaping it was really tough this year finding any help. I mean, some years I've had up to like 20 guys, and I had a time where probably 3-4 weeks ago I only had 2, and most of the jobs, like the landscaping projects, I was doing on my own. So it was getting pretty hectic between that, my son playing baseball, me being the head coach. But once school let out, I had a bunch of high school kids lined up, and we've really got caught up a lot in a hurry. So in the past week or so, I feel like I'm kind of back on schedule, back in the woods about every day. I usually, it's not like every day all day, but I usually try to, get out a couple hours. I don't have a gym membership, but I will say hiking mountains every day, even for a couple hours, I'm telling you, it will do you good enough. So
yeah,
I'm back in my typical routine. Hopefully it lasts.
Nice. How's the skipper role treating you? You guys winning some ball games or what?
Yeah, we've just finished up. Let's see, Saturday, and we had a good season. We almost went undefeated. We only lost one game, but my son's 7, so it's just starting to get where you start to get competitive, and the kids are developing, and it's just a really really fun time to be a coach and around that age class, and it went from t-ball to like I don't want to say misery, but it was really challenging. But kids are starting to catch the ball, hit the ball, and understand the game, so it's getting a little better.
Yeah, I remember when my daughter was younger, and she, played soccer, and I mean, it was just like the first game or two was like funny. You just kind of laughed, and then after like the second game, you're like, oh man, somebody kill me. This is excruciating.
Exactly.
Because they don't have any concept of how to, they're just kids. They don't know what they're doing, but they all just run toward the ball and they kick the ball back and forth to each other within like a 3-foot area,
Yep. I know just what you mean. We do soccer as well. So it's just, like I said, it's fun to finally be able to see the competitiveness being brought out, understanding how to play and wanting to win and playing hard, all those things. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. How into mountain bucks is he?
He's into it, but honestly, I don't know. I can't quite remember how much I was into it back then. I wish he was into it more. But he's so involved in sports that it kind of takes up a lot of that extra time, between school and everything else. Today we went out and we put a camera out. I mean, he loves it when he's out there, but he's got so much going on right now in his life that, it's not like the top of the priority list, and that honestly doesn't bother me a bit. So,
right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that'll come soon enough. The bug will bite him, and then the addiction starts, and then you're afflicted the rest of your life.
Amen. Yeah.
Right. But you ended up you killed a good bird, didn't you? A mountain bird, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did. It was a really rough start for me. I missed a bird and wounded a bird. So, and I might, not to brag, but I might miss one like every 5 years. But in the first week, I had 2 opportunities that I didn't connect. So luckily the third strike I hit, but it was really good up here this year, better than I expected. Seemed like the population went up a little bit. There was a lot of 2-year-old birds, which they seem like they want to work with you more, and they gobble more, and just makes it a little bit easier. That's what I ended up killing, a 2-year-old, but had a nice big long beard on him, and he put on a good show in front of me. So nice. I was happy to take him.
Yeah, you can't ask for more than that. I think I got out twice. I'm not a big turkey hunter. Anyone who listens to this show knows I always kind of preface anytime I talk anything about turkey hunting, I always say I am the world's worst turkey hunter, and I'm okay with that. It's I go out usually and just take the shotgun for a walk, and I usually get sidetracked. I usually make a good effort, because especially early in the season, PA you can only hunt till noon. So I usually make a good effort to try to stay focused till about noon. But this year I was actually up north in a big woods piece, and I was actually truck camping. I was camping in the back of my truck, so I got like a soft topper on it, and I was like, oh sweet, first time for a maiden voyage for that, for that piece. And I woke up in the morning and just, I don't know, it was maybe 200 yards outside of where I was kind of, waking up. There's a bird, ripping, so I tried to work him. He gobbled on the limb. And then once he hit the ground, he went quiet. And then I kind of, in my hunt was basically like, and I was like, well, cool. If that bird's in the area, then I'm just going to kind of stay around here and see if I can't strike him up again. And so I was making a loop to try to kind of check cameras along the way. And then, I saw a hen, early on, and she boogied out of there, and I didn't hear any gobbling or anything, and couldn't strike up a bird, and checked a camera or two. And then I got into this one little area that I had a camera, and there was a big scrape that was in there. It was in a bunch of laurel. And there's this little drainage that kind of runs off the side of it. And I knew that there were some acorns in there. And well, I shouldn't say I knew. There's some trees in there that produced, and I wasn't sure if they'd produced because I hadn't checked that camera since I hung it in whenever that was, probably May or something like that, the year prior. And as I'm walking up to it, I found a pretty good shed. And I was like, all of a sudden, like turkey hunting was over. And And I was now full on checking cameras, looking for sheds, and it turned into like a deer scout real quick. And that was about the end of my turkey hunting. So my turkey hunting lasted probably about a total of 4 hours this year, to be honest.
Well, if I was in your shoes that day, I would have honestly done the same thing. So you're not telling me something I've never done before. It's when it comes to deer hunting, I mean, I love my turkey, but it doesn't match what my passion is for deer. So I hear you on that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is too, is like, I'm also challenged when it comes to finding sheds. I don't find very many sheds. I've literally been shed hunting with buddies where I've stepped over them and didn't see them, So the fact that I found a shed, I was like, all right, the deer gods are shining on me today. I should probably just start scouting because I feel like this is going to be a good day, And it was. I got a bunch of real good intel that day. Saw a couple deer, which was good because I don't see a ton of deer necessarily in this particular piece, but
Sure.
yeah. So it got me pretty fired up, man.
Great. No, at the least, that's what turkey hunting can do for you. It can get you in the deer woods more, and you can honestly do both at the same time. So I know just what you're doing, and I'm the same way.
Yeah, 100%, man. But how was your deer season last year? How'd you? I think you killed a deer last year, if I'm not mistaken. I try to keep up with all my buddies and what they got going on, but sometimes the memory fails me.
Yep. No, I did get a mature 8-point later in archery, November 12th. It was honestly for me though, prior to that, really slow. It seemed like basically for a lot of people, things were really late here. Like the rut was real sluggish until we got closer to mid-November. Even for guiding, we killed a few earlier in the rut, but then right around the same. In fact, the weekend I killed mine. We had 2 or 3 clients kill that weekend, and our biggest bucks were killed. Biggest deer overall were November 12th and 13th. So I think I, hit it on one of those magical days. But no, other than that, like I said, it was pretty slow until then. And then, things really picked up for about a week. It seemed like this past season, maybe the 12th through the 20th or so, even though our archery ends a little bit before that. But that was probably the best stretch of activity that we were seeing. I was hunting New York a little bit too at that time, having some action over there. I didn't end up killing anything though, but still, I'm always happy. I mean, it wasn't the biggest deer I've ever taken, but just to take a mature deer in the mountains, I wasn't hanging my hat about it.
Yeah.
It's definitely just a challenge in itself. So I don't have any regrets, but there was a lot of things last season that, I felt I learned and made some mistakes and things I could have done better. So those got written down, and I plan to learn from those things, and hopefully this season will be even better.
So not to open up old wounds, but what were some of those things?
Yeah. So one of the things that I should have known better on was we had similar conditions last summer and then early fall, except what happened was when I say conditions, drought conditions, but then in September we started to get a fair amount of rain, and then so there was a lot of water in the woods, and so I didn't bank on any changes, especially in doe activity, that would be water based. So a lot of my plans and preparations were in typical areas, and then it seemed like right towards the end of October and early November got super, super warm. And I'm talking like first week in November up here was like pushing 80, and everything dried up, which that pushed all the does down low. And I really failed to stay on top of that. The funny thing is I was seeing a ton of sign up high, and hunting off that sign, but checking cameras, mainly all night pictures, and I didn't pay enough attention to the lower elevation stuff because I really usually don't have success down there. And for the first part of the rut, that's where clients should have been. Just seemed like in that hot weather, that's about the only place there was any action was down, mainly in creek bottoms, lower portions and north slopes, like all stuff that I overlooked. I'm kind of always just, sometimes you can be a little bit, one-minded, things stay the same every year, and that's not honestly the case. So I did eventually catch on to that, but, I was a little late.
Right.
But that was probably my biggest biggest flaw last season, that I wasn't paying enough attention to what was going on out there.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Like it's just, always having to, read the woods, those small shifts that we don't, that we
Yep.
sometimes overlook or that we don't think about. I'm curious though, those creek bottoms, are those, you said north facing slope, creek bottoms, that little cooler air, down there because this big piece I've been kind of playing with. I have a little bit of that too.
Yep.
And I've kind of thought about trying to play that action, say like earlier in October when I know it's still warm and they're going to need to either one, get to water, or two,
Yep.
want to just get away from where it's warm. Cause I mean, it's literally when you walk up out of that creek bottom, it's like a 5+ degree change in temperature just walking out of it. And I'm curious though, are these creek bottoms are they hemlock lines? Because the one I'm dealing with, like there's a lot of hemlock in this area. And so like most of these bottoms are heavy in hemlock. They just kind of create that canopy in that cool area.
That's absolutely, almost all of our creek bottoms are that same type of environment. Another thing too that I find is water becomes even more attractive when, say, like when all the green browse starts to die off and, there's really not much as far as them to get water from what they're eating. And especially that's about the time that the rut hits. If you're not close to a water source, I really think that that time of hunting season, and given the fact that it's the rut, they're burning up a lot of energy and a lot of fluids, water is a huge factor in the rut. And what happened last year is like all those upper springs that are all over through most anywhere, any mountain country, they were all dried up. So, that forced deer to want to be closer to water. Plus, like you said, we got brutally warm weather for that time of year. So all the water's down low, plus the cooler air.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was a no-brainer. And I'm like, why didn't I catch on to that fast enough? And like I said, I was only probably a week to 10 days late on that, but still, you hate to, you feel like you should be ahead of that versus have to see it happening.
Right. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Like, what do you think? Like, I'm trying to figure out how to word this correctly. Like, cause I don't want to ask like a specific like temperature, cause that's like not the right way to think about it, but like how unseasoned, that's a better way. Regardless whether it's October or November, how unseasonably warm do you think it needs to be to where that shade cover, creek bottom, temperature change, starts to come into play?
I think as soon as you get out of the 50s, honestly, you get even 60s and sunny. I mean, that's that time of year also. Yeah. I mean, and they're wearing their winter coats. Like they're ready for below zero temperatures if that happens. So, they really get sluggish and has a huge effect. And, obviously, and probably quite a few people that are going to listen to this know that I've really paid close attention to weather and that kind of stuff. And, had done a lot of studying over the years. And as far as temperature goes, like it's a big driving factor to whether they're going to move a lot or very little.
Right. It's interesting that we talked about the slow rut, starting this conversation off, because I was literally just texting with a buddy of mine that we were talking about it. Cause I forget how we even started talking about it. he shot me a text about something and we got onto the topic of the rut. And then he was like, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of does that are very early, like while I'm driving, that I'm seeing that are just like, newborns essentially, that they're like just recently dropped, and he was like, and that makes sense. He's like, in this area that he lives and hunts, he's like, because he's like, I didn't see much of anything for rutting activity at the very, very beginning of November. He's like, most of the action that I saw on trail camera was in that, like, for him, he was like around the 17th to like the 24th or the 24th kind of time frame. He's like, so it's almost like does missed that, or a lot of does didn't get bred that first cycle for whatever reason, and a lot of them did the second, coming in. And
absolutely, that's so true.
Yeah, and what I had mentioned, I was like, it's interesting, is like because when I looked back, I pulled all my trail cameras and stuff, this spring. When I went through and I looked, I found it curious. I was like, interesting. I was like, I'm not seeing a whole lot of activity like around a little bit, but not like what you would expect around that Halloween through like the 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe up to the 6th, whatever the case is, whatever the peak rut dates are for your particular area. I was like, but man, it blew up like the 14th to the 24th. I was like, there was a 10-day period where it was bananas, and it would make a lot of sense just based on the type of running activity that I think people saw in the woods. It's like I'm seeing it on a trail camera, and now when we start watching fawns drop, it's like it feels like it's playing out. Are you seeing similar things in your neck of the woods?
Absolutely. That. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, and I know that you know this. Like, obviously, not all the does are bred within a few days, and
Right.
there's some that were bred, probably Halloween or maybe a couple days sooner.
Sure.
But it did seem late this year. And then I was watching a study that you've probably heard of Dr. James Kroll before.
Mm-hmm.
They were measuring fetuses up in Michigan, and they said it seemed like it was 2 weeks late up there, which they were just kind of like stunned, like what the heck happened? So
Right.
this wasn't just in Pennsylvania. Seemed like a lot of the northern states, things were really late last year, and that's part of, I bank a lot of my strategy and my hunting around the rut, and I think once again that's part of the reason why I was, a little delayed on filling a tag. Just the fact that things really didn't heat up real good until late.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I saw that on my cameras too. Yeah. At that point I was actually in Kansas. So I was only here for like the first, I think I want to say maybe it was like this November 2nd I left for Kansas. But it was hot out there too. Now it didn't slow anything down out there. It was, I think on the 6th I saw 30 deer and like $8.
Wow.
So it went off as it should out there, but they also deal with a lot warmer temperatures, just like in general, in that neck of the woods.
And I can tell you too that mountain deer are a completely different animal, and I know people that have done studies like me in places like Kansas and other places, and they don't see the same data and numbers that I get from mountain deer. So it's just amazing how different parts of the country, it's basically like you're hunting a different species when it comes to whitetail all over the country.
Yeah. I mean, because the guys from Whitetail Adrenaline, Chansey and Jared, like they, especially, I mean, I think this is just how their philosophy is in general, but I know for sure when they're in Kansas, man, they hate a cold front in Kansas. They hate it.
Yeah.
And what they've seen year over year is just, man, when it gets cold, those deer hole up and they don't move.
Yep.
They were like, man, you get like a nice beach sunny day in Kansas, sometime in November, game on.
Yep.
It's like, and it's so counterintuitive to what we kind of think or see around here. That it really is a little bit of a brain switch to have to go through when you change, and go to a state like that to where, some of the things to be true, they're still whitetails. They got to do whitetail things, certainly.
Yep.
But the things that maybe drive them to do whitetail things might be a little bit different.
Yep, absolutely. You better know the deer you're hunting for the state you're hunting, because it could be different.
Yeah. But speaking of, I know we kind of referenced the study that you've done, and if people out there listening, didn't know, I mean, you've talked about this on a couple of different shows, so we won't go into great detail, but, just, I guess, recap, what you did, and then, what were like the one or two things of that study that you kind of like when you wrapped it all up that really kind of stood out to you that a hunter could take advantage of?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll just kind of point out, what I've done over the past, it's probably been about 6 years now. Just because through my guide service, I was running so many cameras. I mean, this past year, like 170, 180, most years at least 100. And there's a lot of data and intel, that I was kind of just throwing away every year. I'm like, there's really good information. When I go back through these cards every year, you'd see, certain dates, certain times, different times of the year, like, holy cow, what's going on with the deer, whether it's, increase of activity or decrease. So I started to, when I first did it, I was keeping track of moon phase, barometric pressure, weather fronts, and you name it, and obviously temperature. And then after I did it a couple years, I mean, I saw changes and patterns related to almost all the features, that I just mentioned. But I was noticing temperature really was the most outstanding. Like, temperature was really something that had a big pull on what the deer were doing every day. So really in the past few years, I've limited most of my focus to just temperature.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is, at the end of every season, I pull all the cards, and then I write down every daytime buck photo that I get out of all those cards. Now, not to make it too confusing, but when I say photo, if I get a picture of a buck and maybe he's, the camera's on a scrape and I get 10 pictures of him, I only count that as one photo. So
yeah, it's one instance, one visit or whatever.
Exactly. So I'm not counting every photo. But anyways, so every sequence of movement in the daytime gets counted. And the study goes from October 1st to December 10th, just for the fact that I'm only really interested on what these deer are doing throughout the Pennsylvania archery and gun season. So, in the past few years, especially, it's just, I would say overall, once again, it's temperature, has been the biggest factor that I'm seeing. Probably what I've learned the most is it seems like what I call a 30-30 day, and that's when you at least have a high somewhere, anywhere in the 30s, and a low temperature of 35 or less. That seems to be like, there's never been a day I've done this study in a 30-30 day that you haven't had phenomenal movement. So if I've learned anything is pay attention to those, forecasted, 10-day forecasts or however far you feel that, it can be accurate, but really pay attention for when those days are going to come.
Can you explain that one more time? I'm a little dense, so okay. I need to know this.
Yeah.
So a 30-30 day, how can you describe that again for me?
Yes. So a 30-30 day is what I call it. And that is when the high temperature, that's in a 24-hour period, when you have a high temperature, it seems like anywhere in the 30s can be fine. But it seems like 30 is the key, somewhere in the 30s. But the low temperature, honestly, means more than the high. Like if you had like a 39 and a 37, like a 39 degree high and a 37, it would still be a good day, but it wouldn't matter as much unless it was 35 or less. Like that's going through years of studying and like paying attention to all that detail. Like below 35 for a low, like, and that morning low overall seems to have a phenomenal effect on deer movement. Like you could have a 50 degree high, but say like a 29 degree low, like a super cold morning, you'll see that movement good even throughout the whole day.
Wow.
It's the low temperature, like I said, is more important than the high. But when you can get what I call a 30-30 or 20s are even better too, like for a low, but at least somewhere in the high 30s for your high temp and below 35 for your low temp. Those are the best days to be deer hunting, at least for mountain deer in this part of the country where I'm hunting.
Wow, that's awesome, man. Like that to me is like a nugget worth gold right there. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, especially for guys, like like me, it's, I have some flexibility because I work remotely and I work from home and stuff like that, but I'm still a working guy and I got to really prioritize if I'm taking a day off or I'm going to like hunt a morning and go and sign into work a little later or whatever. Like I'm trying to do it on the day I have the best odds to see the deer I'm trying to see, and that's in a particular spot,
Exactly.
And, man, I'm going to be looking at those 30 days pretty hard on the old 10-day forecast this year for sure.
It's amazing, honestly. And in some ways, this has had a negative effect on me because, like, now when it's not that prime of weather, I don't have a desire to hunt.
Right.
Because you can kill a deer at any day, any time, but, like, your chances of success go up so much. Like, it's unbelievable. And then I even went back this year and did a study on all the dates I've killed, all my mature deer. And I think it was like 8 out of the past 10 have been prime weather days. So then I'm like, Steve, maybe you need to cut back a little bit and just focus more on these prime days. And honestly, that's really what I'm going to do more. It's not going to keep me out of the woods being, doing guiding and that. Like I'm going to have clients here no matter what the weather is. I can't predict or, we're going to be hunting no matter what. But as far as my own hunting, especially me being, a little more flexible in my job, like I'm just more focused on prime weather days anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense because, what do we always talk about is bow hunters, or deer hunters in general, trying to kill a
Yep.
mature deer, regardless if it's in the mountains or wherever. We're
Yep.
always trying to stack things in our favor. Like if you're looking for a tree to hunt, like you're always looking for like that sign and like multiple things to kind of come together, whether it's like there's a scrape here that a rub line leads to it and it's at this like pinch point, or it's in this thermal hub, or whatever the case is. Like we're looking for multiple things to converge
Yep.
to give us the best
Exactly.
chance at that spot, right? It's the same
Yep.
thing when you're picking a day to hunt. It's like what factors are all coming together for you to make that day the best day to possibly hunt, especially if you're on limited time.
Yep. And what I find, like most of the time here in the mountains, like these bucks don't move a lot. So
Yeah.
you're in a small circle per se, and like a lot of times I know where that circle is, but yet it's not easy to figure out how I can get in there and hunt that deer without spooking them, whether it's my scent, noise, or anything like that. Or you might still be in that circle, but that circle's 15, 20 acres, and it's still almost like to get an opportunity, it still takes a great amount of luck versus on a prime weather day, that deer is going to cover 20 times more ground. He's going to be out of his core area, working scrapes, rub lines, looking for does. Like he's a completely different animal. And if you know places where that deer likes to go, whether it's based on past history or just, your own instincts, but knowing that, hey, that deer is going to cover a ton of ground today. And, or if you get like a good, like maybe a 3-day stretch of really good weather, you can hunt the same spot even 3 days in a row knowing he's going to show up one of these 3 days.
Right.
Like that's the kind of stuff that I'm hunting, like, and that's what I'm taking advantage of.
Right. Now, did you see was there anything that stood out to you about wind, whether it was direction or maybe even more interestingly, wind speeds?
Mm-hmm. Wind speed up here does not have a huge effect unless you get a little closer to winter. Like if it's like mid to late November and you get a lot of wind and it's really cold, like it does seem to push deer down low. They'll get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say another thing though that I've noticed, and this I've even written some of it down, is it seems like if you get an east wind, it really messes up deer movement too. And I think because it's so rare,
yeah,
and a lot of deer basing their betting on it, and just their overall movements too, like knowing the wind usually comes from this or that direction. It's something completely different. Those days seems to really, I see a lot of poor movement. But other than that, wind speed or wind direction, I don't see a ton of change.
Yeah. And the bummer was this year, I'm thinking like there's a couple fronts we had at the beginning of October this year,
Yep.
Talking about east winds, right? I'm pretty sure one of them was almost like a dead east at one point.
Yes.
And,
yep.
and I was all excited about it. But then when I looked, I was like, man, I do not have a single setup for an east wind. Like not a single, you know what I mean? Because you get like predominantly southwests, right? And so like pretty much every location I go into, it's like I'm looking at it for access on like southwest winds, and I'm wanting to make sure I can hunt a north wind, when we get a front, and make sure I can hunt a south or a southwest, in these setups. And east wind rolled in and I'm like, oh, this is good. Like I always hear all, people talk about, big deer making mistakes because it screws up their bedding because it's such an oddball wind to get. And I didn't have a tree worth a squat to hunt that particular. I mean, I still went out and hunted, but it could have been a lot better, I guess I should say.
Yeah, and in my point, maybe other people haven't seen this, but I've seen decrease in movement because I think the deer just like, holy cow, this isn't normal. And anytime they lose sense of security, they tend to bed more than anything else. And I think that's what you'll see a lot on an east wind.
It'd be interesting to see if an east wind, if it happens in the middle of the day versus at night, if there's a difference, right? To where it's like that, or maybe even more specifically, if it's happening like as the morning is coming, as they're heading back to bed, because like that almost like a wind switch at the last minute when they're headed back to bed, when they still feel comfortable because they got that twilight. Do they make any additional mistakes or move any further because of that. Cause I can totally see middle of the day, if that wind switch happens and it's an east wind, it's like, and it's just screws them all up. They could potentially just hunker down, you know?
Yeah, that's what I think happens. But like you said, I think depending on when it hits, it could also work in your favor. But overall, most hunters, an east wind usually makes it way more challenging. I don't want to see many east winds in this hunting season. I doubt we will, but
Right.
you never like to see that.
Right. Well, man, so you mentioned, the number of cameras that you run,
Yep.
and I know we were talking about offline before we started recording a little bit that, this is a question I get, a fair amount, just, Greg Litzinger always kind of makes fun that I find big deer on camera no matter where I hang a camera. It's just like they show up, it's like there's a magnet or something. And so I'm just kind of curious, what your truck camera strategy is. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of limit you because, I don't run 180 or whatever number of cameras, but for a regular dude, I run a fair amount of cameras, especially in the Big Woods piece where me and a couple buddies pull cameras together. And so, myself, I might run 25, and then my buddies might also run, 10 for one and 15 for another. Yep. So between the three of us, we probably have like 40 cameras out. You know what I mean? But if we're talking to the normal guy who maybe has 5 cameras, and he's headed to a new piece, of Big Woods somewhere, yep. where and on what type of setups would you hang those camera to help you build a plan for the fall, if that's the situation you were in?
Yeah. Well, as an individual, like, if I'm targeting, a certain deer, and this isn't really, as far as how I run them for guiding and all that, but to target an individual deer, I like to do what they call cluster cameras. Mm-hmm. I like to have cameras in places where maybe I can get intel from that deer. It's probably just night intel, but somewhere that I can maybe get an idea how far away he's bedding, if he's still around, direction of travel, but yet know that even if I check that camera every day or 3 times a week, it's not going to bother him. But yet back in further, I can also have cameras that are a little more crucial to my hunting setups. But usually, like I said, I'll start with these cameras that might be just something down in a creek bottom. A buck is, coming down for water every night. Maybe there's a big community scrape down there that he's just kind of, mingling with other deer and socializing. But then from there, I will have cameras around his bedding or at least potential bedding. I love to look for scrapes near bedding. I've always said that, a lot of people think when a buck gets up out of bed that, his belly's empty, he's ready to go head to a main food source. But I kind of think a little bit differently, that most of the bedding areas I've ever found, there actually is usually a ton of food in there. Mm-hmm. Generally just browse, though. Bucks are up feeding a lot in their bedding areas throughout the day, browsing. So I don't think they're coming out of the bedroom as hungry as what people think. But what I think they have a lot on their mind is there's usually some scrapes or rub line or something in like that neutral zone between his core area and to what the other deer are doing in his area. There's usually a spot where, he's communicating with other deer, wants to see what other deer are kind of around the perimeter of his core area. And a lot of times it's a scrape. So I'd love to have a camera on scrapes just outside of bedding. That's a camera, though, that I'm often not checking, though.
Right.
But I might be able to, down in that creek bottom, know that, okay, this deer looks like he's bedding on this east slope, or he's always coming from that direction. That creek bottom camera might still give me that intel. And especially if I'm getting that deer, several hours after dark, but you can see he's coming off the mountain. Okay, we know that deer is bedding way up the mountain somewhere.
Right.
But then also I'm thinking, okay, what's that buck doing in the rut? I'm still keeping an eye on food sources, doe bedding, and what does are doing. And I kind of, when it comes to individual deer, I think early season situations, I think rut situations, and I'll just cluster cameras all over his home range, basically for the whole season to try to, get a crack at him. I think especially in the Big Woods, if you were to put all your focus, how a lot of people do in other parts of the country, like early season. I actually think the early season in the big woods is the hardest time to kill a mature buck. So I don't put all my cards or all my eggs in one basket. I kind of, know that it's going to be a long grind, and I'm using those cameras based on the whole season, and depending on what I think that deer is going to do at different times. I'm trying to get intel all throughout that hunting season.
Yeah. What I always say if someone's limited to, just say 5 cameras or whatever, is basically kind of what you're saying, which is like put cameras out in places that you think are going to be high value spots, right?
Yep.
And let them sit. And you may not kill that deer this year, but getting that year over year data is the part that is most critical, because if that deer is using a particular, so you learn about that one deer, and then if other deer end up coming in to use it, say he dies or whatever the case is, like there's some similarities that are going to occur between the different bucks that are going to use that area, because there's a reason that they're there. And that reason, as long as the environment doesn't change, will be constant. It's like there's a funnel there, there's a food source there, there's great bedding there, there's a lot of communication, a communication hub that's there, or whatever the case is, So in that long-term data is the thing that really helps you kind of fine tune your game plan.
Yep. I know the buck I killed in 2021, I basically went off of what I had that deer in 2020 as far as camera intel. And that was kind of my starting point. And that's exactly what led me to take that deer. I really didn't have that deer figured out or had any intel that deer outside of the rut. But even though I killed him in the rut, I ended up finding where he was bedding. I have pictures of that deer from late spring all the way till November 6th when I killed him. But my point is, like, going back, checking cards, and, kind of really combing over the intel from the prior season of an individual deer, like that was a true scenario that, like, holy cow, that really did have an impact on me taking that buck. That was last year's data that I got from him that really ended his life and put him on my wall.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, man, so take this same individual that we're talking, this hypothetical individual we're talking about who has these 5 cameras, let's talk about summer, cause we're in summer right now. Especially in the big woods, like where do you find the most success with summer trail camera pictures? And this is kind of leading to another question I have as we kind of go. But like, where do you kind of prioritize to kind of find a joker that maybe you've been looking for, and you're like, all right, I know he's around here somewhere. I want to find him early because I want to try to piece some things together. What are those kind of high value kind of locations that you're looking for summer trail or for a summer trail camera hunting? Because in ag country or smaller parcels or whatever, field edges and stuff like that are great. But, where you and I are hunting predominantly, it's like we don't have access to those. And so we have to look for other things. What are those things you're looking for?
Yep. Most years, for summer intel, like if you have clear cutting, like they love like those 1 to 3 year old cuts because it's basically a food plot. So I call them big woods food plots. Like here on public land, you are not allowed to make a food plot, but anytime there's fresh logging, it pretty much does that. Like mature bucks, especially this time of year, there's not a lot in their lives. Like there's not a lot going on, but just eat and rest. Security as well. They got to have water, although they're getting a lot of water out of what they eat, but they're still going to be, near a water source. But it's food, water, and security this time of year. So whenever you have like a massive abundance, like of browse, like a young clear cut, it has everything that deer needs. Like, especially if he doesn't have to move around much, like deal with the hot temps and keep his belly full. Like that's absolutely where a buck is going to be. Now, I will say this year, when because we had these drought conditions, it seemed like this year, clear cuts are still really good, but a lot of them don't have much for shade, and it really seems like deer are pounding, like mature bucks are pounding jewel weed right now. And this, people might think like this guy is just getting too crazy, but in this past week, like I'm telling you, everywhere I'm seeing jewel weed is just mowed down. If you don't know about jewel weed, It loves to grow in wet, damp, shady areas. Like you'll find it growing underneath hemlocks. And like today scouting too, I found this spring coming off the bottom of a mountain that was just, soaked in water, but jewelweed still growing in it. Like, seems like this year jewelweed is a huge key. So, but overall, it's high abundance of browse. Security is still a decent aspect or decent thing you got to keep in mind. However, there's really not much for human pressure, in the summer, except for a few people scouting and some campers, but they still don't want to be disturbed. But other than that, they're very simple-minded this time of year. But sometimes it's still hard to find them because they tend to be in these more abundantly like these heavy browse area, and if you don't know where like these major pockets of browse and summer food sources available, then it seems like the mature deer are harder to find.
Yeah, it's interesting because I saw you made an Instagram post about this, and it was interesting because I'd been thinking about this a lot lately, and yeah, like you mentioned, those clear cuts are nice. Like those are some like nice kind of obvious like food plots in the big woods, right? But what you just kind of mentioned there, and what you kind of mentioned in that post you made, was finding that old warrior, is oftentimes secluded off the beaten path in a patch of that abundance that you're talking about. And the only way you find that is by walking, because you can't see it on a map. There's no way to know that it's there. You know what I mean? And that's actually where I've been finding probably my best like mature buck inventory in the big woods is in those areas. Like I've had some stuff on clear cuts. In the first year it produced really well. Last year it didn't, but it was really hot, like you kind of mentioned. You know what I mean? And like drought conditions and stuff like that. And this year probably kind of the same deal. But where I ended up getting a bunch of my best inventory was actually in those out of the way little nooks and crannies that are along like I call them like micro habitats that kind of pop up out of nowhere, and it might be 50 yards off of a drainage or something like that. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like where I started finding some really good inventory. Is that what you're kind of talking about when you talk about those kind of like abundance areas?
Absolutely. And another thing to keep in mind is the clear cuts are just becoming the thing. And I'm sure there's guys that are going to be listening to this podcast at the same time, scrolling through their phone, looking for clear cuts. Everybody's doing that anymore. And the technology is so advanced. You can find a 1-year-old cut, a 3-year-old cut. It's so easy to use that strategy, and doesn't take a lot of footwork. I mean, you can do it all from home for the most part. So I think some mature deer are catching on to that because, they're sensing more human pressure around these cuts. And I think it turns into a similar situation. Like, okay, it might be the feeding area, but yet he might not be bedding there as well. Like you may see a lot of sign around a cut, but doesn't mean that deer's going to be living there because it's getting, too much human pressure. So those more harder to find areas that require, the boots on the ground, and you have to put a little more thought into that's really been the key for me in the past couple of years as well. But honestly, I like that. I like it because I'm a boots on the ground scouter anyways.
Right.
Like I like to know that what I found, I highly doubt anyone else has found. Like to know you have that on public land, like that definitely helps a guy sleep better during deer season. So that's the scenario that I'm looking for. And it's good to see that the mature deer kind of fallen into that category of hunting.
Right. And so I asked these questions because this next one is something I've been thinking a lot about the stuff we've been talking about. And then this is the next one that I've been kind of pondering. Cause like I said, this will be your number 3 on this big woods piece. And I finally feel like I have enough of the puzzle pieces to where last year, I think I hunted it only 4 days, I want to say last year. And I saw I think I saw 2 bucks, in those 4 days, which was,
that's not bad.
Yeah, pretty good. And I had an encounter, I think, with a third. I'm kind of pseudo not counting it, and I'm pretty sure it was the one I was trying to kill, and he was bedded, 30 yards from the tree I was trying to get into. I didn't realize he was going to be bedded that close, and blew that opportunity. But in what I'm starting to learn in this piece, and it took me a hot minute because typically, where I hunt locally, if I get summer pictures of a deer, and where I hunt locally, the parcels are smaller.
Hmm.
They're not big woods or your normal average size pieces of public land in and around like suburban areas, if you will.
Yep.
And those deer typically, whenever I would get a good deer on camera, let's say, let's take a summer and say I got, 5 good bucks on camera that are shooter caliber or let's just say 3.5 years of age or older, for this area. And out of those 5 bucks that I might have on camera during the summer, I'll be lucky if one of them stays relatively close to where I had initially found him.
Hmm.
Like where when they transition and they peel their velvet, like by and large, most of them are gone, and I'll probably never get them on another camera the rest of the year. You know,
Hmm.
Whereas what I'm seeing in the big woods is like I'm finding these summer little hot spots where I'm getting awesome inventory. And if I find 5 really good deer in that particular area or whatever number it is, like I would say at least half of those deer are sticking around, and they may not I may not get them on that exact camera again like once they peel velvet, but I'm
Yep.
probably going to get them on a camera that might be 200-300 yards away. Like they didn't leave
Absolutely.
the county. They just kind of slightly shifted because of like the foliage is changing or the food slightly changed or whatever the case is, but they're not leaving like the area. Like they're it's almost like they're going to stay in their home range to a degree, but just kind
Yep.
of shift like how much time they're spending in a specific area of that range.
Yep. You're 100% right. That's exactly what I see. And I get asked this question all the time, especially this time of year. Like, a lot of guys think it's worthless to be running cameras right now because, there's going to be a big shift, and it's, they think that, okay, whatever I get now, I'm not even going to be able to find, once hunting season comes. And, that may be true in certain areas
Mhm.
throughout the country, but, up my way and from what I've encountered, my whole life of hunting, like the majority of these bucks hang around more than what people think. And where a lot of people screw up is like they'll have one camera in a specific spot this summer, and that buck disappears, and so they either won't adjust,
Mhm.
and they think, okay, he's 10 miles away, or I mean, I'm exaggerating, but
Right.
still they think he's gone, or they'll just pull the camera out and leave. And I've seen it both ways. Like I'll see bucks not real. Like say if I have a camera on a community scrape right now, and I might get a buck on camera, 5 or 6 times there throughout the summer. But then it seems like most of September and at least the first half of October, that deer doesn't show up there at all. And you would think, okay, he's gone. But yet if you left that camera there, all of a sudden he starts showing back up again, maybe around Halloween, a little sooner, a little later.
Mhm.
But most people don't wait it out. Or like what you said is they don't have enough cameras in that area
Yeah.
to maybe catch on to the fact that, okay, a buck is on a different food source. He might have changed his bedding. I mean, there's habitat changes from summer to fall that are going to cause that deer to do different things.
Yeah.
And, that's where a lot of people just give up. They don't try to adjust and, stay on a deer. So that's exactly what happens. And the majority of mature deer that I find, I would say 60-70%, they might have a square mile that they spend a lot of time in, but that's really where they spend most of their time the whole year. And
Yeah.
it's not, sometimes in the rut, yes, they'll really expand their range, especially, after they breed those first groups of does near their core areas. But overall, these deer hang into a smaller area than what most people think.
Yeah, and the other thing, tell me if this is crazy talk too, but like what I've started noticing, and I haven't run as many trail cameras and I don't have as many years with this piece as you have with with where you hunt.
Hmm.
But what I started to notice too was just the older the buck was when I get him on camera in the summer, not only do most of the deer that I'm finding, like, mature deer that I'm finding, they don't transition as far as like I would have originally thought, but
Hmm.
also the older the deer is that I'm finding on camera in the summer, the less likely it is that he's going to move very far at all. Like
Yep.
like the more mature he is, the more steadfast he is kind of in that spot is what I'm kind of seeing. Do you see
Yeah.
anything similar to that too?
Yep, I do. Is the only problem that I find, on public land is because there's so many people running cameras anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if anyone has like told people you need to run trail cameras, not to brag, but it's me. But there's a lot of local people that have really caught on to my strategy,
Right.
which I'm fine with. But my point is seems like some of these big deer are getting bumped around a little bit because there's so many people knowing about some of these bigger deer in my areas that,
Mm-hmm.
through trail cameras that I'm not saying they're shifting far, but my point is you have to keep an eye on, is this deer being hunted by other people? Do other people know about this deer? Because, constant human activity in some of these areas is going to drive that deer to do some different things. But
Right.
if you're hunting a low pressure scenario, which preferably I like that deer might do the same exact thing year after year as long as there's no changes, especially to his habitat. Like if he's got everything going for himself, he's got all his needs and bases covered in one general spot, he's probably just going to continue to do that until somehow he dies.
Right. And this is the other hypothesis I came up with, and I want to run it by you because you have way more experience in the mountains than I do. When you find those, what I kind of call those microhabitats, or you kind of call those areas of abundance, and I'm not talking the clear cut necessarily. I'm talking about those small little hidey ones that you find like with boots on the ground.
Yep.
If you find a good deer that's in one of those areas, that's oftentimes where I'm finding like those bucks being homebodies. And my hypothesis was, I've never been out where you hunt, so I don't know, exactly what the woods looks like there. But the spot that I'm at, like it's so open, like you could walk a mile, maybe two in one direction and just not run across a single piece of deer sign because it's just so wide open. And then you hit these pockets of just like abundance like you're talking about. And my thinking is that they stay in those areas because why transition? Because the next section of abundance might be 2 miles from there or 3 miles from there or whatever. And if they have everything in that one spot, they're going to stay relatively close to that until they exhaust whatever is there. Does that make any sense? Do you see anything similar to that?
Absolutely. You have to factor in that a mountain deer, like if he's going to make a long trip for a certain reason, like he's going to burn off a lot of energy. And I think that's why the mature ones tend to be homebodies, and especially, early in the fall or right after the rut, but those periods where he can't afford to burn up a lot of energy or before the rut, he's got to preserve calories. Like those are times of the year when he's looking for those, what you call micro habitats, like somewhere where I can just hold up, keep my belly full, pack on the fat reserves, stay away from hunters. Like if he's got it all there, like that's exactly what he's looking for. And that's why, I keep talking more and more about, I think if anything I'm doing right and that I would advocate for other hunters to do is start doing more of that boots on the ground type hunting and not as much, on the internet, satellite and so forth. Like, because and you're seeing it, and I think a lot of other people are going to like, that's really what these mature deer are starting to adjust to is they're catching on to, the anything that everyone else is looking for, and they're finding those more hidden gems that, in my opinion, is really the way to be hunting anymore.
Yeah. And the only way you really find those is like you were saying, man, is just, you got to get out and walk. And even like this, even like this time of year, it's like, I'm the first to admit, I hate scouting in the summer. Like, I just don't like it. Call me a wimp or sissy or whatever, I'm just not a big fan of it. But, the more I do it, over the years, it's like the more I find, value. And I just think anytime you can spend time in the woods is time well spent. But
absolutely.
What do you, when you're out in the summer this time of year and you're checking trail cameras and maybe you're doing some scouting and stuff like that, what are you looking for right now and how is it different from what you look for maybe say during your in-season scouting?
Yeah. Well, what I like about the summer is there's a lot of unanswered questions for the upcoming season where I'm starting to get answers like, okay, I'm starting to be able to see what mass crops are available. I'm even starting to get a feel like how you're starting to sense, like, looks like we're probably going to have drought conditions, low water levels. I'm more trying to to develop a list of what are the ingredients for success this coming season. Like, yes, I can take advantage of postseason scouting in the late winter and early spring, and overall, yeah, that's my favorite time. But now I can really tell what I'm going to be dealing with this coming fall, and that's really what I'm doing right now. I'm also seeing, like, I'm more of just a mature buck hunter overall, but like, obviously I'm probably going to want to hunt the deer that the biggest antlers as well. So like, now I'm also able to, start to get an idea, and it's a little early, but say another month from now, like, okay, that deer's going to be a giant. Like, so really this is where the plan really starts to get written now. And I'll know what food that deer is going to be eating. And all those little things really start to pop up throughout the summer where you can really develop a plan versus, like I said, in the postseason, you can get to know a deer and get to know his areas, but every year is going to be a little bit different. You don't have control over his environment. So it's nice to be able to really, put some things in the stone on what you're going to do this fall.
Right. Yeah, I love that, man, where you start to get a glimpse, right? Because I feel like, yeah, I felt like this personally where, because a lot of years I've done like, most of my scouting in the postseason, hung all my cameras. I'm a guy who, this year I was late to the game with my cameras. I finally got all of them out last weekend. They got out, or the rest of them got out. But I usually like to have almost everything done by the time like turkey season comes in, or finish everything up during the beginning of turkey season, and then I'm basically out of the woods until, for me, I might do a camera check and like, shoot, I usually don't check them till probably about sometime after I think it's like the 22nd or something of August, just because I know there's a date there where, I want to ask you that question too. There's a date in there that I've talked to Chad Sylvester about that he kind of picked up from the Drury's that like around that time frame of like the 18th to the 20th, roughly, you'll get some new bucks that'll show up out of nowhere that you haven't seen all year. And those are typically the ones you could expect to probably move into the area when fall rolls around. But, I typically am not, spending a lot of time in the woods in the summer, and it has bitten me because the first time I get a glimpse as to what's going on, like, did the mass trees produce this year? Does that seep still hold water? Or whatever the case is, like, I'm finding it out as I'm trying to hunt it. And that's kind of what happened last year. And I was up the creek without a paddle, essentially.
Yep. Well, you look at it this way, like, in the big woods, like, to find something out, like, or doing it in the fall, like, to find out, does this ridge have acorns? It might take you hours to get to a certain spot, but if you can go in there in the summer and you could take 2 or 3 hour hike somewhere, check a remote ridge and be like, okay, yeah, there's feed here or whatever, you think is going to have an impact on that environment for that deer come season. Like, to get that figured out now saves you so much time in the fall. And you also can not really, impact or, put as much intrusion into an area when all these things ahead of time as well. Like, you don't have to go zigzagging every inch looking for that 1 or 2 oaks that are producing. Like, those are definitely things that you can find out now and save you a lot of work and really, have a huge impact on your success because, you're not bumping these deer around and trying to figure everything out when the game's already started.
Right. So when you locate one in the summer, and say one does kind of shift a little bit, right? And maybe you lose track of him. How are you going about trying to kind of relocate him for fall? Like, what's your method for doing that?
I will say I'm probably not I wouldn't even call myself good at, like, say the first time you get a deer all summer, or it's the first time you've ever encountered a big deer. Like, he just shows up in the summer and then all of a sudden he disappears late August or sometime in September. Like, I do struggle to find a deer if I don't have any history with that deer.
Right.
But where I have had a lot of success is because I'm running so many cameras. Like, a lot, and it might not even be, like, it might be a month or two or even further away, but then all of a sudden, eventually I find that deer going by one of my cameras somewhere. Like, it may be 2-3 miles away, but my point is, like, usually I've got on a deer shift like a year in advance. Like, okay, because I run so many cameras in such a wide stretch of area, like, I see where this deer went. He disappeared in beginning of September, but then look at him. Here he is, second week of October, all over this one area on this one camera. Like, but usually I'm ahead of that after a year of history with the deer.
Right.
But I will say I also think it's a huge gamble to really beat down the woods in search of a deer that has disappeared. And I know there's probably some people that are, might not like that answer, but I think you can almost push a deer out. But we touched on this earlier. Like, I love to hunt deer that I have a year or more of history with. Like, it's so much. It makes the strategy, the game plan. It really makes it a lot more better when you can think it out for a year and study that deer and the intel you have. And sometimes I've hunted them for multiple years. Every year you get to know that deer better. But in the first year of getting to know a deer, I always say that's the toughest. I'm more of a guy that likes to just sit back and hope he makes it, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah, and that's where that year-over-year long-term data starts to come into play. And then, maybe even if you find a new deer that comes in out of nowhere, if you've run trail cameras in a general area for, let's say, 3 years, you might have a pretty good idea, if he's spending time in this area, what other deer prior to that in previous seasons has done.
Sure.
And that'll at least give you a direction as to far as like, hey, yeah, I know that there's a big scrape down here and there's a feed tree, and I know there's a really good bedding area up here, and he's kind of making the same general route. Like, he's coming from the same general direction. So I wonder if he's using those same things, right? Like, you at least have like terrain and habitat data in movement related to that might apply to that particular deer.
Absolutely. Yep. That's something to consider.
Right.
For sure.
The, man, well, I know I've had you on here for about an hour, buddy, and I want to be sensitive to your time. I could sit here and talk to you all day. We might have to trade some text messages or something, because I'm getting an education here myself, and I'm feeling, after talking to you just now, I'm feeling a lot better about my chances this fall in the Big Woods piece. So you got me set right, buddy. I think I'm good.
Well, at least I've done that. If I've helped you and no one else, I'll still feel good about myself.
Hey, it's all about me, dude. That's what we're trying to do. I'm just kidding. Before I let you run out of here, though, let folks know where they can find out more about you, what you have going on. Because I think you have some like summer scouting classes and stuff that are going on too, right?
Yep. Yeah. So that's just something that I do. This year is going to be pretty much every Friday in July. They'll go from like noon to 4 p.m. They're entirely in the field. Usually take about 6 to 8 guys out every Friday. It's just it's never anything like, as far as when I got into guiding, like that was something that I planned to do. But this was something that just kept getting a ton of requests. A ton of people are like, hey, Steve, we'd be willing to just pay to spend some time with you in the woods. So I've just kind of taken advantage of that, and I really like doing it. I just like these podcasts, I love to share what I know, and see it have an impact on other hunters. So yeah, that's
awesome.
Something I'll be doing every Friday from basically July through September. Then I'm also doing a weekend class, 2 days. In our camp, and that's going to be August 12th and 13th. So if anyone's interested in that, reach out to me on, Facebook or Instagram. So, but yeah, that's what's going on this summer. And I still do have just a few spots left, for, this fall too. If anyone is interested in the hunt, feel free to reach out to me there as well.
Cool. And what's the website address, and what's the, your handle on, social media?
Yeah, well, anymore, I got rid of my website because honestly, I couldn't keep up with the website nor the amount of calls and messages I was getting. So all I have anymore is social media on Instagram or Facebook. It's if you don't know of me at all, it's Sherk's Guide Service, ERK_S guide service. Feel free to look me up, give me a follow or like, or shoot me a message. I'm always looking forward to getting to know new people, especially when they're deer hunters.
Awesome, buddy. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. You're one of the good ones, man. I always enjoy talking to you, and nothing but success to you. And hopefully I'll have some cool pictures to send you this fall, some of a big woods buck after this conversation.
No, thanks a lot for having me. I definitely want you to keep in touch, and if I'd love to get back on. I feel like we just slightly touched on deer hunting, like there's so much more. So if you want to even get me back on before the fall comes, feel free to. I definitely enjoy talking to you.
Let's make a plan to do that.
All right, bud. Take care. You have a great night.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there as well. I'd be super appreciative if you would do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible: Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, and Genesee Beer. And until next time, we'll see y'all.